Hello, we're going to have this video just to talk about why we're actually doing doing this project. Why we're taking the effort to do this and not bothering or doing something completely different. And so it's we're calling it the kind of philosophy of what we're trying to do here. So just to make a start, I think on that one is we were looking for some land initially, just to so we could do projects on. So we could do a little bit of gardening on it. We could do some experimentation with things like solar panels, other things like that, and just to somewhere a little bit remote, so we could do these sort of things on it and experiment with that. And then also so we could spend the night there, so we could stay overnight. And so we started looking at buildings of some kind, that we could stay there. And we looked at everything from RVs to various other ideas of how we could live. And so over time, the plan evolved and changed, and then we kind of came across the idea of natural buildings, earth buildings, and thought that would be, aesthetically they look really nice. They very naturally form into the landscape very nicely. And so we looked into that more and more and decided that would be interesting to incorporate into the overall scheme of what we're trying to do. It's not the be all and end all, it's just part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and the best part we found about Cobb building is because it's so easy, we can do almost everything ourselves. As engineers, it really excited us to be able to do everything from foundation to building the walls to plumbing to electrical on our own. And a lot of people do alternate building from the point of view of minimizing the destruction, of the earth. We were partly interested in that, but as engineers, we were also very much interested in being able to build every aspect of the house ourselves. And we are hoping it will be a mixture of traditional and modern, where we'll incorporate some smartness or intelligence into the building.
Yeah.
And also we don't have to stick to straight lines, and the shapes can be organic, and it lends itself beautifully to different shapes and natural colors. And there are plenty of photos on Pinterest if you guys are interested, which you should check out.
Yeah, so as we started looking into this more, we started to see the kind of physical properties of the very basic materials we're talking about using. And so initially it can look a little bit far out, and some people do these buildings, I'd call it under the radar, where you're not getting full planning consents for them, and they're kind of done almost hidden away in very small buildings and very almost done in secret. So we're definitely not wanting to do that. We're trying to build a proper size building that we can comfortably live in, and because it does get quite cold here in winters, and it's not we're not just wanting a very basic building, I'd say, from that side. And materials, although people do it under the cover because of the complexity getting permits and permission to build using them, they have still got very compelling physical properties that we're interested in, and that we can, if you can demonstrate properly to the planning departments, there's no reason why you can't get permitted.
Yeah, if you look at the history of Cobb building, it's really a form of building with mud, and there are variations to it as to whether how you use straw or mud or clay and the ratio and the mix. But it's been used in all over the world historically, in hot and cold countries. In fact, if you want to compare other cold countries in the northern hemisphere, UK has a long history of extremely old and long-standing cob houses which have withstood extreme weather. So cob houses are actually pretty strong. They're pest and termite resistant, fire resistant. They're fairly good performance under earthquake conditions, and there are people doing all kinds of tests to standardize that information. So we started off by taking a 10-day course for Cobb building. There are plenty of courses all over the country because it's a movement which is gathering momentum. But we decided to go to the source, to Oregon, to the Cobb Cottage, where Ianto Evans and Linda were the ones who pioneered this building in the U.S.
Yeah, they kind of reintroduced
to
it
reintroduce it.
because I guess when the planning laws came stricter and stricter, it got really marginalised as a building technique and largely forgotten about. So they've really created the renaissance of these buildings, bringing them back into not quite mainstream, but definitely bringing back the skills to people. They
Yes.
run these courses, and these people go off and create more courses, and so it's a kind of rapidly expanding and evolving technology because each region of the country has got its own particular take. Like in New Mexico or New Mexico area, say of the US, where there's a very different climate to the northwest, to the northeast, to where we are here as well. And so the techniques people use in different areas have to be suited to the environment and I suppose the natural materials that are around as well. What their particular materials, and one of the principles here is that you're trying not to use tons and tons of materials being shipped all the way across the country. You're trying to use relatively local materials here, not it's related to the land it comes from.
Yeah, so we spent 10 days taking the complete Cobb Cottage course, which span end of July, beginning August of 2016. It was one of the most interesting experiences we have had and a great vacation. It's the Cobb Cottage is located in a valley and they're completely off the grid. Most of the people who attend these courses tend to be people who are already sold into this kind of living, and sorry, there's a call coming in to my phone, and not everyone would be willing to live and work under those extreme conditions where you're completely off grid, you're using almost no mechanized tools, and it takes a long time to build a house, and you're trying to live in extremely small houses ranging from 150 to a few hundred square feet. We are trying to bridge the gap, so to say, where we are doing things a little more practically, and which can be accepted more easily by the bulk of the public.
Yeah, because we haven't got a huge amount of manual labor to support us.
Yeah, and we don't have the time, so it's a question of time versus mechanization, and we are not going to be mixing cob by hand. We are going to do what's called tractor cob, and what it does is it reduces the labor involved by almost 90% by using comparatively very little fuel for just mixing the cob, and we are still getting a lot of our material from excavated sites. So this is a balancing act between building a house which is not very large but not extremely small either, something which uses minimal resources. You could do it by using even less than we do, but we feel what we are doing is something a little more realistic and pragmatic, and something a larger amount of people would be willing to embrace. We are also hoping that when more people use this approach, the planning and zoning departments will become more familiar with the process, in turn making it more acceptable for doing this. In fact, one of the reasons we looked for land in Frederick County was because they have been open to building with cob, and they have had people build with straw bale houses. So we are thankful to all the people who have already done this in the past legally, which is obviously helping us. So we will hopefully help this process a little further.
Yeah.
and we can also talk about the same thing goes for septic systems, which we'll be talking about in detail in a different call, in a different video. But composting systems are not legal in many places. You can install a composting system provided you already have a regular septic system installed. Now, the rules vary from place to place, county to county, but fundamentally, composting toilets have still not made their way into mainstream legal methods of, septic systems.
And also into people's general acceptance as well, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, that people would tend to shy away from the perception of a system that's different, or perceive it being smelly or whatever.
So that's something we have not been able to do, is install a composting system. We could install it, but it's going to be extremely expensive because of the way the rules are designed. And I'll talk about that in a separate video which gives an overview about septic systems.
Yeah, so I mean, and like I said before, so the main thing is we are focused on the house, obviously the construction through through these videos and stuff, but it's also what else goes on in the land and what we're trying to learn and understand about the process with solar, with the septic systems, with the gardening side of it as well. There's a whole philosophy there that we're trying to.
So effectively, we hope to have almost a self-sufficient system with its own septic well, solar, fruit and vegetable garden,
water,
and water. That's the well. And the one good part about permits as far as utilities is concerned is Frederick County does allow us to stay off the grid as far as power is concerned. Note that even if solar is allowed and in fact encouraged in many places, many counties or states will not allow you to be disconnected from the grid. But Frederick is a county which allows us to do that. So we are going to stay disconnected from the power grid. Yeah. So we are hoping there'll be a lot of purists who will say that this can be done cheaper, this can be done with less, by burning less fuel, by not using a tractor. And honestly, we're not claiming to
have a full. We're not claiming that this has been done in the most
fuel efficient manner
or minimalist way,
because
possible.
After all, we are going to be driving 1 hour to go to the land. But the point is, as more and more of us prove and show that this can work, we are hoping that our friends and their kids can see and understand that things can be done in a different manner, and maybe the next generation would find it easier to have this as their primary residence.
Yeah.
And
without being scared off.
Without being scared of that.
Or thinking it's only restricted to living in a very small building.
Yeah. Now we'll be putting up a separate video for budgeting, and you'll be surprised at what it's going to cost. And again, we are trying to be realistic because you'll have heard plenty of information and YouTube videos where people say we built houses for a few $1,000s, which is true, but bear in mind there are a few assumptions there. One, that they didn't have to pay for land, or they're building on someone else's land, or they were lucky enough to be in a place where they could lease it out from a farmer. That's one. Second, they're building under the radar. As soon as you're building legally, there is a huge amount of fees involved. Just something called impact fees is $15,000. There is permit fees. We cannot have a composting toilet. Septic becomes a huge cost. So when you add all that, almost 70 to 80% of our cost is incurred because, one, we had to buy land. We didn't have a source of water like a river or a stream, and we are doing it legally. Mm-hmm. So the cost is you cannot compare what we are doing to somebody who's doing it under the radar and who already has land. But it still shows you that you can have a beautiful natural building.
And it's
where-
still a fraction of the cost of
It's still a fraction of the
an
cost
equivalent modern building built in the same area.
in the same area, yeah, with the same features, and the fruit and vegetable garden and things like that. So hopefully you can make. We are hoping these videos and this documentation will help you get a realistic view of what is involved, and it is up to you as to what kind of trade-off you do in terms of doing things legally or using labor versus using some amount of mechanization. And this should hopefully get you in the right path and help you to think. There are also plenty of videos and plenty of resources on each of the topics we cover. For example, just solar systems or just septic systems. There is plenty of information out there for you to go into detail, but we will be giving things more at a high level, at a system level. It'll teach you how we went about the thinking process, and it'll hopefully make you more confident about approaching a project of this scale or magnitude, and how you go about planning for it, both in terms of time, resources, and money.
And how you break it down into practical elements, so make each bit, you can understand each bit and manage it and plan it and get the acceptance done.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.